you got amnesty. That's the problem, Mr. Speaker. It's a fake no border security, but it's a total, authentic, nearly 100% amnesty. And I'd like to ask Representative Steve King to speak to that now, and I yield to the gentleman. I thank you.
I thank the gentlelady from Minnesota for yielding, and I appreciate the delivery that you make and the understanding and driving this issue. Because if a few of us don't stand up and drive this issue and remind, Mr. Speaker, that the American people observe what we do here, and they are thoughtful, they're intelligent, they're analytical, and they understand the history of this country, and they don't want to have somebody feed them a line. They want to know the squared away truth. That's why I dig down into a bill like S-744, the Gang of Eights bill in the Senate, and take it apart and analyze it and put it back together and come down with this conclusion. From the beginning, I called it the always is, always was, and always will be Amnesty Act. And the reason I say that is because you have to just kind of have a little bit of license with our grammar, but if you is in America, you get to stay. If you was in America, you get an invitation to come back. And, you know, if you ever get here, you always will get to stay here. See, the always is, always was, and always will be Amnesty Act. And if that doesn't trip your biblical trigger, then I can describe it this way, and I'll say more secular terms. And that is, it is the perpetual and retroactive Amnesty Act, which means it goes on forever, and it also invites the people who have been deported in the past, says, we really didn't mean it. If we've deported you in the past, it was by a mistake that we didn't realize because our president hadn't been elected yet, and he hadn't decided that he was going to violate his constitutional oath and grant this executive edict that's called the Morton Memos that legalizes the people that are here. And I'd remind you, Mr. Speaker, that we had 400,000 people that were adjudicated for removal in this country, and the President issued an order and used our precious resources to go back and comb through the records again, and that directive said, look at them on an individual basis. The reason they do that is because they claim they have prosecutorial discretion. If they deal with individuals, then they can not enforce the law, but if they have to put it into classes of people, then they know that they don't have prosecutorial discretion from a legal point. So they use resources to comb through those 400,000 names of people to find ways that they could waive the application of the law. That's amnesty by executive edict, and it's using resources to grant that. Didn't matter that they were young or old if they hadn't committed a felony and been caught at it, or if they didn't commit and been caught at these 3 mysterious misdemeanors, they were going to get the application of the law, which was removal. They were just waiting for their final removal order, and so the President believed that he had the constitutional authority to grant this amnesty. Now, this was just a precursor to the balance of the Morton Memos, which are the DREAM Act light, so to speak, this executive edict for the DREAM Act. And it then sets up 4 categories of people. Generally young people, but now we see that, according to the Gang of Eights bill, age up to 35. If up till age 35, if you want to attest that you came in America, say before your 16th birthday or your 18th birthday, depending on which policy that you want to take, now it really wasn't your fault, it was your parents' decision. Well, reminds me of a long shirt-tail relation who found himself in jail on Christmas Eve. And his father decided he would bail him out and bring him home for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Christmas dinner, and take him back to the jail where he belonged again. And when his father showed up, this uncooperative son was so resentful, he said to his father, "It's not my fault, Dad, it's your fault, because you controlled everything. You controlled my genes and you controlled my environment. I didn't control either one. I'm a product of nature and nurture, and you are the one that produced the nature and nurture. Therefore, it's your fault that I'm in jail." And I can tell you what his father said. You can stay in jail if you think it's not your responsibility, and think it over. Well, I heard this new theory come in the committee here just yesterday, I guess it was, that if young people can't form intent. So I wondered about that. That was a bit of a new theory for me. We do prosecute intent in this country, and we prosecute intent to juveniles.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, be happy to.
Representative King, or Mr. Speaker, Representative King had stated that in the committee they were told that young people could not form intent. And my question would be, Under the proposed DREAM Act that we have looked at so far, we're looking at age 35 being considered an age from 0 to 35. These people would be given automatic amnesty from being an illegal alien. Then, of course, we know their parents would immediately be able to come in as legal permanent residents as well. So my question would be, do we consider that you are not legally capable of forming an intent when you're age 35? I yield back to the gentleman.
And thank you, lady, for yielding, which is my point. We know that young people can form intent. That's why we discipline them at a young age. And 2-year-olds get a little discipline because they have intent. 3-year-olds have a little more intent. They get a little more discipline, and by the time they get to be 7 or 8, they're actually disciplined. So I think that that's an argument that moves us off the target. And regardless of whether they have intent when they're 1 day old, 1 week old, 1 year, month old, or 10 years old, whenever that time comes, when they become of age, then, and they realize that they're unlawfully present in the United States, the law requires that they remove themselves. It's just the law. And so we expect them to accept this responsibility, whether it was the intent that they had when they came in or the intent that they have to stay tomorrow. And if we don't do that, then we've absolved a whole class of people from a responsibility and rewarded them with the objective of their crime. And these are the things that trouble me. If we destroy the rule of law, an essential pillar of American exceptionalism, we could not be a great nation without the rule of law. If we destroy that, even in the narrower version of immigration, or even the even narrower version of the Dream Kids, if we do that, then it expands into all people that are here illegally, because age is only the difference, and you cannot draw a bright line. And furthermore, then you have expanded the amnesty throughout all immigration, and you've destroyed the rule of law. And if we can't restore it in this time, since we've been struggling to do so since the 1986 Amnesty Act, we could not restore the rule of law with regard to immigration for all time. And we could therefore then not control immigration in this country any longer, only by trying to keep people out by barriers in the borders. But then if we couldn't then enforce a law against anybody that got in. Can you imagine turning over the immigration law in the United States to everybody but those who are in America? If you're not in America, you get to decide immigration law. If you're in America, you don't get to decide immigration law. That's what we're dealing with. The gentlelady from Minnesota.
Thank you so much. One thing I wanted to mention as well, in speaking with one of the experts, Mr. Speaker, Robert Rector from the Heritage Foundation, we had asked him, what is the average age of the average illegal immigrant into the United States? He said it's age 34. And so isn't it a coincidence, Mr. Speaker, that the legislation that's being proposed is to grant amnesty to anyone age 35 or below, and again, they would instantaneously be able to apply for legal permanent residence for their parents, and it would be granted automatically. So we are talking not about a tiny subset, we're talking about a tremendously huge subset. But here's the other identifying feature that Mr. Rector had said. The average age being about age 34, the average education level being something less than 10th grade. Now, that's not to make fun of anyone that they don't have the education level, but I'm talking about the impact now, not on the illegal immigrant. I'm talking about the impact on the American people, on American citizens who are senior citizens, American citizens who are in the working age population, and also on the young people who will shoulder the burden for all of the debt that is being handed to them right now. I'm thinking also, Mr. Speaker, about the fact that when an individual comes into this country and they have less than a 10th grade education, the statistics bear it out, Mr. Speaker, according to Heritage Foundation, that those individuals over the course of their lifetime are revenue consumers. In other words, they take more out of the United States Treasury than they pay in. And so if we allow the DREAM Act, which is 3/4 of the way amnesty, which is backdoor amnesty for all practical purposes, full-on amnesty, if we allow that, we are bringing into this country legally tens of millions of individuals who would be taking out of the Treasury at the worst possible time, when we have pensions to pay, when we have health care to pay, when we have education to pay for, police, fire protection. And the estimate is that we're looking at about over $30,000 a year in annual subsidy, direct payout for the average illegal alien that's coming into the United States. Now, they do pay taxes. They might pay about $10,000 in taxes, but they're a net minus. They're a cost to the Treasury of about $10,000. Why is this important? We're talking about people. Yes, we are, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about the American people. American senior citizens who work their whole life for their Social Security and their Medicare and who are nervous about the fact that we're growing into bankruptcy. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about people, all right. We're talking about the American worker, 22 million of whom can't find full-time employment. And now we have James Hoffa from the Teamsters Union who wrote a letter this last week, and he said, Mr. President, what's wrong with you, Mr. Speaker? He said, we worked hard for a 40-hour work week. Now the new norm is a 30-hour work week or less and no benefit packages. So where's the jobs? Where's the wages? Where's the benefit packages? Are they all fleeing to illegal aliens that we're making legal? Or are we going to think about our senior citizens who are Americans who fought and bled and died for this country, for the workers of this country, and for the people that we are about to hand the baton to, the next generation who are going to take over this country? I yield to the gentleman from Iowa.
Thank the gentlelady. And I think that we have some intelligent and responsible members of Congress that probably haven't contemplated something that I'm about to say. I hear them talking about it. They're okay with increasing the workforce, especially in the low-skilled categories, because they believe that agriculture needs laborers and food processing needs laborers. I hear that from agriculture, and I hear that from food processors too. But here are the facts. The double-digit unemployment, the highest unemployment levels that we have, are in the lowest skilled jobs. So when you go into double-digit unemployment and the low-skilled people are in oversupply, you have to believe that labor is a commodity like corn or beans or gold or oil, and it's determined by supply and demand in the marketplace. And if you have an oversupply of people that are willing to work in or underskilled jobs, then the wages go down and get suppressed. An example would be like this. In the packing plant in the town where I was born, people that worked in the packing plant 25 or perhaps 30 years ago made an equivalent to the salary of a college-educated teacher working in the same town. And they could raise their family, pay for a modest home. Those children would have an opportunity to go to college if they chose, and they could live a happy life by punching the clock, going to work every day, and cashing the check and paying the bills. Today, people working in the same plant are making about half of what the teachers are making, and the teachers aren't overpaid in that community either. That's what we're dealing with. And so when you see what happens when the difference is, the people that used to work in that plant 30 years ago, they're not there anymore, but people that came to go work in the plants have been recruited from foreign countries and put into that workforce, and there have been such an oversupply that they've driven the wages down. Supply and demand. So why would we as a nation, when we have an oversupply of people that are willing to do low and unskilled work and the wages are suppressed and the unemployment rate is up, why would we go out and legalize another 11 or 22 or 33 or 44 or 55 million people? Why would any nation do that? Why would a nation that has 100 million people of working age that are simply not in the workforce decide, we don't want to pull those people to work. We're going to let them collect the 80 different means-tested welfare benefits, and instead we're going to go over here and import tens of millions of people to do this work, and then realize that you've got a double liability here because people working on the lower skilled jobs can't sustain themselves in this society with the wages that they're getting because they're suppressed by oversupply. And on the other side of this, you've got this 100 million people, a lot of them are drawing down from the public treasury, and we're paying them not to work. You put that all together, we've got a double liability here instead of a double asset. And I've spent part of my life in the trucking business, and we always say that we want to payload both ways. We don't want to go empty two directions. We want to payload both ways. I yield back.
That's true. And, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to add, I don't think that we can underscore enough the fact that when we're looking at the DREAM Act, people think that we're talking about a very small group of people. This is a large group of people, and we're talking about amnesty, 3/4 of the way of amnesty. So the Senate bill is 100% amnesty for all illegal aliens in the United States. The DREAM Act is 3/4 of the way toward full amnesty. It isn't just children. We're talking about 35-year-olds with the average age being 34 of an illegal alien, and we're talking about them having an immediate ability to make their parents legal. So the $6 trillion cost is pretty darn close with the DREAM Act as well. And again, just realize politically what happens here. We're looking at 100% amnesty in conference committee with 3/4 of the way amnesty in conference committee. Does anybody think we're going to have anything less than full-on 100% amnesty and no border security? I yield back to the gentleman from Iowa.
Well, I think the gentlelady has described it very accurately. And we need to be careful about what vehicles get sent over to the United States Senate that could eventually be turned into a conference report. I know that we have an assurance that it's not going to be such a thing, but we also know that there are things that come up that surprise us. And so I ask people that are advocating for different pieces of legislation that would come off of this floor, paint for me the path through which enforcement legislation could get to the President's desk without amnesty attached. And even if it did get to the President's desk with the best enforcement model that you can imagine, that amnesty attached, the President would sign it, and he wouldn't enforce the law. He would just grant the amnesty. And so, you know, I had a statement that I made that I'd like to introduce into the record just for clarity purposes, and I'd ask unanimous consent to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say I appreciate the gentlelady coming down here and leading on this event here tonight and taking such a strong voice. And we have a great country still, and we can be a greater country yet. But we must re-anchor and re-establish ourselves to the principles and the pillars of American exceptionalism. We cannot do it without holding the rule of law intact. Yield back.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Iowa, and I'm grateful that he is putting into the record the pillars of American exceptionalism. That is our nation. And again, what we're concerned about is America first, the American people first, American jobs first, American wages first, American benefits first. And unfortunately, a study came out in April from Harvard that said illegal aliens have contributed to a loss of income of $1,300 a year. Let's not drive that number any further. So I'm very grateful, and I yield back to the Speaker. I'm grateful that we had this opportunity to discuss this with the American people this evening.
The gentlelady yields back.
Yes, I do.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I seek recognition to make a motion to adjourn.
Is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Today, the House completed work on the 2014 defense spending bill, including debate and votes on dozens of amendments. One closely watched amendment, sponsored by Michigan Republican Justin Amash, would have prevented the NSA from collecting data on Americans' phone calls and emails. That amendment failed in a 205 to 217 vote. The House went on to pass the full defense spending bill 315 to 109. Tomorrow, the House is scheduled to work on bills relating to the disposal of coal ash from power plants. We'll have live coverage here on C-SPAN.